Right, so let me get this straight. Sir Keir Starmer is stood there with a straight face, lecturing Donald Trump about respecting the self-determination of Greenlanders, whilst simultaneously having just handed over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius without bothering to ask the actual Chagossians what they fancied. The irony is so thick you could spread it on toast. It is almost impressive how Labour has managed to take the moral high ground while standing in a pit they dug themselves. Welcome to British politics in 2025, where principles are flexible and consistency is apparently optional. Quick favour, if this sort of political theatre fascinates you as much as it does me, smash that subscribe button. Over 94% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It is completely free, takes literally 2 seconds, and honestly means everything to us here at British Mirror. Cheers if you did. Right, back to this spectacular display of political gymnastics. So here's what happened. Donald Trump, in his infinite wisdom and subtlety, announced 10% tariffs on Britain and other European nations. Why? Because they had the audacity to conduct military exercises on Greenland. Yes, you heard that correctly. Military exercises on NATO allied territory. The sort of thing allies do together all the time, but apparently this warranted economic punishment from Washington. Trump announced these lovely tariffs would kick in from the 1st of February, posted on Truth Social like he was announcing his breakfast order, issuing stern warnings to the UK, France, Germany and Norway. Because nothing says special relationship quite like slapping trade penalties on your closest military partners, does it? Now, Sir Keir Starmer responded exactly as you would expect. He condemned the tariffs as completely wrong and made a rather passionate speech about how Greenland's future should be determined by Greenlanders and the Danes. Noble sentiment, absolutely spot on. Self-determination is a fundamental principle of international law and human decency. The problem is, and this is where it gets absolutely delicious, Sir Keir apparently forgot about a little archipelago in the Indian Ocean called the Chagos Islands. You see, just recently, Labour finalised a deal to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. A deal that the previous Conservative government had been working on, admittedly, but Labour pushed over the finish line. And here's the kicker. The Chagossians, the actual people from these islands, many of whom have campaigned for decades to remain under British sovereignty, were not given a referendum. They were not asked their opinion. They were not consulted in any meaningful way about whether they fancied being handed over to Mauritius, like a parcel nobody wanted to pay postage on. So, when Sir Keir stands there defending Greenland's right to self-determination, you can forgive people for raising an eyebrow or two. Enter Camilla Tominey on GB News, who did what any good journalist should do. She asked Culture Secretary Lucy Nandy the blindingly obvious question. If Labour believes so strongly in self-determination for Greenlanders, why did they not extend the same courtesy to Chagossians? It's a fair question. Actually, it's an excellent question. The sort of question that should make politicians squirm in their seats whilst they frantically search for an answer that sounds remotely coherent. Nandy's defence was, shall we say, creative. She claimed that what Labour did with the Chagos Islands was actually a continuation of Conservative policy, which is technically true, but also a spectacular bit of blame-shifting. Yes, the Tories started it, but Labour finished it. That's like starting someone else's terrible novel and then publishing it under your own name and expecting not to get any criticism for the plot holes. She went on to explain that the deal was necessary to secure the future of Diego Garcia as a strategic military base and to protect British security interests. Fair enough, national security is important, but that explanation rather conveniently sidesteps the whole self-determination question, does it not? The truly fascinating bit of Nandy's defence was when she pivoted to saying that all government decisions are based on what is in the interests of the British people. Which again sounds reasonable until you remember that the question was not about British interests, it was about Chagosian self-determination. It's classic political deflection. Answer the question you wish you had been asked, rather than the one you actually were asked. She then went on to say that Britain doesn't think it's in anyone's interest to allow America or anyone else to determine the future of a sovereign country. The irony is so delicious you could serve it as dessert. Because here's the thing, if you genuinely believe in self-determination, it should apply everywhere, not just when it's politically convenient. You can't stand there defending Greenland's right to decide its own future, whilst simultaneously having denied that same right to the Chagossians. Well, you can, obviously, as Labour has just demonstrated, but it makes you look spectacularly hypocritical. Let's talk about the broader context for a moment, because this is not happening in a vacuum. The Chagos Islands deal has been controversial from the start. There are serious concerns about Chinese influence over Mauritius. Beijing has significant economic ties with Mauritius and has been expanding its influence across the Indian Ocean region. Critics have warned that handing over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands could give China an opportunity to establish a presence dangerously close to Diego Garcia, one of the most strategically important military bases in the world. The British and American governments have insisted that security guarantees are built into the deal, but forgive me if I remain skeptical about how watertight those guarantees will prove to be in practice. Nigel Farage, never one to miss an opportunity for a pointed comment, weighed in by saying that if Greenland is vulnerable to malign influences, perhaps we should have another look at Diego Garcia. It's a fair point. If we're worried about strategic territories falling under the wrong influence, why are we handing one over to a country with close ties to Beijing? The cognitive dissonance is staggering. And then came the transatlantic thunderclap. Republican Congresswoman and Trump ally Anna Paulina Luna issued a warning that sounded less like diplomacy and more like a trailer for a sequel nobody asked for. If Britain bans X, she would push legislation to sanction not just Sir Keir Starmer personally, but Britain as a whole. Yes, you heard that correctly, sanctions. Miss Luna pointed to precedent. In 2024, the US imposed sanctions on a Brazilian judge who temporarily blocked X. Those measures included tariffs, visa revocations, and other consequences tied explicitly to free speech concerns. In other words, this is not theoretical, it has already happened elsewhere. Her message to Britain was unambiguous: reconsider this course of action or face consequences. Now, take a step back and appreciate the sheer absurdity of this moment. Britain, once famed for exporting liberal democratic values, is now being warned by American politicians that it risks sanctions for restricting free speech. The irony is so thick you could spread it on toast. Miss Luna went even further, framing the issue not as technical compliance, but as a political war against Elon Musk and free speech itself. That's a devastating line, because it reframes the entire debate. This is no longer about protecting children from artificial intelligence misuse. It becomes about whether the British state is comfortable suppressing platforms that host uncomfortable opinions. And this is where Sir Keir Starmer finds himself trapped between instincts. On one side, the loyally cautious internationalist who wants strong relations with the United States and a thriving technology sector. On the other, the political leader under pressure from activists, regulators, and party figures who view free speech platforms with suspicion. The danger here is escalation. Ban X or even seriously attempt it, and Britain risks retaliation. Not just rhetorical outrage, but economic consequences, tariffs, trade delays, diplomatic frost. At a time when growth is already fragile, that's a gamble bordering on reckless. And let us not forget the U-turn factor. Starmer's critics believe this ends the same way many of his toughest-sounding positions do: announcement, headline, backlash, quiet retreat. If that happens, the damage may already have been done, the signal sent, the trust shaken. This entire saga exposes a central tension in modern British politics, the desire to regulate speech in the name of safety versus the reality of living in a globally connected digital economy. You can't pull one thread without tugging the entire web. So, where does this leave us? With a Prime Minister facing pressure from regulators at home, allies abroad, and critics who see this as an attack on free expression dressed up as concern. With a government that wants American investment while antagonizing American tech. And with a public watching another culture war skirmish play out while the cost of living quietly hums in the background. If Sir Keir Starmer truly wants to protect children, the focus should be on enforceable, proportionate rules applied consistently across platforms, not grandstanding threats aimed at a single company because it happens to host inconvenient voices. Because once you start banning platforms, you don't just silence the people you dislike,